Welcome to the Chapter 3 Stigma podcast. This podcast was created to be there for any individual who feels that they are at a low point in life and are confused, seemingly alone, and helpless in their situation. I am a recovering alcoholic, and I felt this way too, until I sat across a table from another addict who shared his story and made me realize that I was not alone in my struggles. My life was saved by this realization, and I hope to help anyone struggling by sharing my story to show you that you are not alone and that life can contain unbelievable riches and meaning. Welcome. I am glad you are here. Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Chapter 3 Stigma podcast. If you're new here or just joining us, we've just wrapped up an overview and quite an in-depth analysis and reflection on my own experience pertaining to the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Like most everything with this entire project that the Chapter 3 Stigma body of work has turned into, there's always a surprising amount of depth and content to go into as I start to explore or begin looking into different facets of living in recovery, of dealing with intense grief and just kind of incorporating all of that into living a fulfilling and meaningful life. And so with that in mind, I have a vision and a hope for the next steps that I want to take pertaining to the podcast in particular. I do have some outstanding inquiries out with owners of the content that I want to cover next. So I kind of have to hit pause on jumping into that. And hope to get some of that permission to get into the body of work that I really want to and have a lot of desire to detail next. So hopefully that'll be something that I'll get to present to you soon. It is content and information that really had a profound effect on me, and both before entering into recovery and in going through dealing with the loss in the few months after losing Lucy, as Alyssa and I and the rest of our family were just kind of looking and exploring and trying to figure out our bearings and really figure out that new normal and how to move forward. This was a piece of work that really helped in quite profound ways. So in the meantime, I had an experience this past week that I wanted to actually fold into the podcast series here, because I have taken the opportunity to go back to North Point, the rehab facility, the inpatient rehab facility, where I spent 28 days back in May of 23. And I have actually gone back 3 times now to present and detail my story as an alumni of the program. And so it's an evening during the week where they will host a single alumni member to come in and just do a really deep dive into their background, their struggle with their substance of choice, and just kind of detail what their healing journey looked like and really how they have been doing in the time since leaving North Point and entering into a life of recovery. In preparation for this last session that I did, where I was the alumni speaker, I actually sat down, and for whatever reason, the past couple times I didn't really think through it in this much detail, but I noted down like key takeaways that I wanted, the patients, the individuals that were there in the rehab facility during that time to take away, especially being early in their recovery journey. I think prior to this third session The times that I had gone back as the alumni speaker, it was relatively close to the time that we had lost Lucy and had just moved back to Boise. And so I think I was still working and trying to incorporate and understand how dealing with that grief of such a critical loss in our life was going to play a part in my recovery journey that I hadn't really noted out. Like, what would I actually hope that someone who is early in terms of days, weeks, or months in their journey in recovery, what I would hope for them to take away and understand. So in today's podcast, I would actually like to step through some of these lessons. And there's kind of like broad subjects that each of them are segmented in. But anyway, this was largely just kind of stuff that came to me top of mind. I haven't spent a whole lot of time putting it in much of a sensible order, but I thought I would jump into my notes here about early stages of recovery and some key lessons that I have learned, and in particular, key lessons that I learned through experience. So the first one, you have to figure out how to stop obsessing with needing to know and understand why you are an alcoholic or an addict. Similarly, I had to stop with the obsession of understanding and answering the question of why as it pertains to God or a higher power. Only when I was able to step back and truly let go of that desire and feeling that I needed to understand why in order to move forward, was I actually able to connect with both how I had become an alcoholic as well as what it meant to have a real relationship with God in my life. And I do feel lucky that I can reflect back now on my story and really kind of string together the series of events, like the setup, as well as the preceding events that ultimately did lead me into being an alcoholic. I truly believe now that is not a requirement for healing. It is not a requirement for living a long and sustained life in active recovery. However, it is something that is an aspect of my journey that I'm grateful for, that I do have an understanding of, but it truly was not until I honestly let go of the need to understand why was I even able to approach it and get an understanding. It's sort of one of those, there's a saying, or kind of like a metaphor with, I think it's like trying to catch a butterfly, where it's like you really just have to sort of be still, let go, and let the butterfly land on you, versus chasing it. And that's probably a really poor example here because they sell butterfly nets. But the gist of it here is truly challenge yourself to let go of the obsession of understanding why. The second lesson or takeaway in early recovery is maintain a level of selfishness when you leave rehab, in this instance where I was delivering this message to those that are in rehab. But regardless, have a healthy level of selfishness when it comes to protecting your recovery. I strongly encourage people to protect their recovery like their life depends on it, because it does. For alcoholics, for addicts, going back, relapsing, anytime you engage with your substance of choice, you're rolling the dice with your life every single time. I am so lucky to be here today after 12 years of battling with alcoholism, because I really connect with that fact. For me, to drink is to die. I'm convinced of that now. I know it. And I really only got here to this point because in the days, weeks, and months after leaving rehab, I was selfish and I really, really protected my recovery. And the other thing that you have to do is you have to find partners in being able to carry that forward. And so what that means to me is there were friendships and there were relationships that I had to step away from that weren't healthy for me to engage in, or weren't helpful for me to give myself the best opportunity to have long-term recovery sink in. I had to realign and really renegotiate my wife and my world and our engagement and our relationship. For me, what that looked like is that I had to prioritize, in the early days of leaving rehab, my first priority was find an AA group that I could get to consistently, where the people meshed really well with me and where I felt like I was at home. I worked really hard at that and focused intensely for about 1 to 2 weeks is all it took until I found that. And then we being my wife and I, we sort of, again, renegotiated and kind of figured out like, well, what does it mean in terms of a weekly schedule? Am I going every day? Do I have to go every day? Is it something where 2 to 3 times a week is sufficient for me being able to connect with this group and work the steps appropriately? And so everything should be perceived as having to be renegotiated with those key relationships in your life. And you have to have the strength and the ability to set the boundaries and step away from those relationships that don't support your need to establish this new normal. Along the same lines of relationships, I think it's very imperative for everyone to assume that every single key relationship in their lives will be different. And to hone in there, I said different. I didn't say better. I didn't say worse. It's just different. The way that I thought about it and framed it for myself, when I was in rehab, we counted every single day that we were in there, all the way up to day 28. Now, sitting here now, 28 days is not much, and it truly is not a huge amount of time. But when you're separated from your life, when you're separated from your family, each and every day feels monumental. So 28 days was a lot when we were in rehab. And the way that I framed it with myself is, my day 29, when I stepped out of the doors of rehab, is everyone else's day 0 in my life. And that framing really helped connect me with the idea that I have work to do in every single relationship that I care about and that matters to me. And so I can't assume that any relationship, just because I spent the time doing the work, going to rehab, doing the steps and the work required to stay in active recovery afterwards, I cannot assume that a relationship is going to be healed and mended just because of that. There's a saying within the space of actually archery hunting. So with regards to like a bow and arrow, there's a saying, when you change one thing, every single thing changes. This should also be your view and your perception of every single relationship in your life. Something monumental has changed. But also, as you progress and advance in establishing your life in recovery, there are all these small changes. And so you have to think about it in this manner. Even a small change changes everything. So again, assume that every single relationship in your life is different. The next lesson, the next couple lessons are aspects that are protective against relapse, because there are surprises to individuals when they have started putting in the work and either they don't feel like it's being recognized or that it's paying off. So specifically, the next takeaway is understand this. People will continue to be upset with you even when you are sober or in recovery or not using your drug of choice. The thought that you are going to have as the person in recovery when there is a loved one in your life who is getting upset with you is, how can you possibly be upset right now? I'm not drunk. You should be grateful. I myself have had these issues. And they stem from like small things of me not cleaning up our house well enough and letting clutter build and having my wife make a comment or get upset, or we just get in an argument that happens in life. And I find myself very, very often reverting to this thought pattern where it's like, I'm not drunk. You should be entirely grateful that we can even have this conversation in a sober manner. As soon as that thought runs through your mind, as an addict, as an alcoholic, you need to just clear it. You need to squash it. You need to recognize it, but not let it carry you any further. I know people who have relapsed because of this, where they got in some sort of squabble with a loved one, and they were so offended that their loved one, they felt like their loved one was not recognizing the work that they were doing because they were getting upset with them. And so they got the fuckets and they went back and they drank or they went to their drug of choice. And so you just have to recognize that life is life, and people are going to get upset at you for seemingly meaningless things. And you know what? You should be grateful that those are the thorns in your side in life today versus the absolute catastrophic destruction that you were bringing into your life when you were drinking or using. Another aspect, again, dealing with relationships and risk of relapse, do not let others and their struggles pull you back into a relapse. Stay engaged with others, but stay selfishly focused. You cannot let someone else's mishaps throw you for a loop. Again, I have seen and witnessed friends relapse who have stepped in when other friends have relapsed. They have helped them, but then the stress and the anxiety of engaging with someone else who was struggling injected, once again, the fuckets in that person, and they went back to their drug of choice. So let others live their lives, and you just be selfishly focused on your own recovery journey. So kind of stepping away from the relationship aspect of, entering the early stages of entering into recovery. And, relationships are like, we are all human. We are social, and relationships and community building are like one of the key aspects of building a long and sustained life in recovery. So there's a lot to focus in on that front. The next lesson that I have is get comfortable being an addict for life. I think one of the very early wins that I noticed, or very, very early like momentum changes that I noticed early in my time in rehab, was getting comfortable calling myself an alcoholic. Now, the work that I had to do and the focus that I had to take in the days, weeks, and months after initially getting comfortable calling myself an alcoholic is understanding and connecting with the idea that I am an addict, I am an alcoholic for life. Now, the continued work that I have progressed even very recently, like even within the last month or so, even with this being a fact that I'm an addict or an alcoholic for life, that doesn't mean that this characteristic of myself has to be a part of my identity at all. I've likened it now to brushing my teeth. It is something that I do on a daily basis that is a part of my routine care and loving exercises for myself. And it is part of a whole of some like practices that are really there to elevate me and try to make me the greatest person that I can possibly be. So just like I don't walk around talking about, hey, my name is Kyle, I'm a toothbrusher. I also genuinely don't feel like I have to walk around and be like, hey, my name is Kyle. And a core part of my identity is that I'm a recovered alcoholic. Now, that is said, even having everything here in front of me with the chapter 3 stigma work that I do, as much as I talk about it, as much as I write about it, I actually really don't see being a recovered alcoholic as one of the key components that I would call out of my identity. And I think getting to that point has been a progress. First, I had to even allow the words "I'm an alcoholic" escape from my lips. Then I had to come to terms with the idea that I'm an alcoholic for life. And subsequently, now, more recently, I have started to see how alcoholism and living in recovery meld itself into me as a person and how I view myself and how I identify. Another aspect and lesson pertaining to identity is this. All of us have good and evil that runs through our hearts as individuals. As an addict, as an alcoholic, I got a real and close-up encounter and touched on the deepest depths of the evil side of me when I was in the throes of my hell and battle with addiction. Right now, I can be grateful for that and for that experience. I know that that potential for chaos and destruction still lives within me. My practices that I incorporate into my life to maintain my life in active recovery are to settle that potential and to minimize the risk of that potential for evil and destruction coming back and completely taking over my life. Now, I do believe I've shared this on the podcast once, but I have I'll just flat out say it. It is a very odd practice that I partake in, but there will be moments when I am driving alone and I'm just out on the interstate, kind of that mindless driving that can occur. And I'll take a second and I will look over at the passenger seat and I will allow myself to visualize and recognize that destructive part of me sitting in the seat next to me. I work to get comfortable with that idea that that potential still lives within me and that chaos and that destruction still resides within me. It's okay that it does. All of us as human beings have that potential for good and evil that is with us from the day that we're born until the day that we die. And so getting comfortable with that and accepting it has been a huge relief of a major burden of mine that I struggled with when I was in the pits of despair. The next lesson, and kind of coming to a close here, be extremely aware, be hyper aware for when things change. And when things do change, when you're early in recovery, be extremely deliberate about maintaining your recovery practices and also identifying moments where you might be falling back into previous thought patterns or having emotional or spiritual relapses. You are working to prevent and to mitigate the physical relapse. Be forgiving of yourself if there's an emotional relapse and you fly off the handle and maybe get angry and upset and snap at someone. Changes to routine or any aspect of life that brings you some sense of like security or belonging, any sort of and like overall vitality and health, any changes in those aspects of life, be on guard in the days and weeks afterwards. So my experience in particular is with when I came off my antidepressants. I came off of them in March of 24, and I reverted for about a 2-week time period, more so with like thought patterns of how I was seeing the world and viewing things as like constantly against me and out to get me. And I attribute a lot of that to rolling off of my antidepressant medication. And it truly was like one day I woke up and finally felt like I was back to homeostasis and feeling better and feeling like I could control the emotions and how they flowed into thought patterns. But my wife and I were very conscious and aware of that time period after I had come off of my medication. Similarly, I have seen people go through job changes, losses, getting new jobs, and kind of lost diligence with regards to their recovery practices and just monitoring how they are doing emotionally and spiritually through that time. And, once again, like relapses happen. And what you want to avoid is finding yourself in the thought pattern, in the thought trap of saying to yourself, things will be better when fill in the blank. Know that you have to focus in and be just like disciplined and diligent about your recovery practices with what life presents you in the moment. Hey folks, I just wanted to drop in with an ask for help. If you're enjoying and finding value from this episode, please take a moment to leave a 5-star rating and a written review. Whether this episode is allowing you to connect with the struggles that a loved one may be going through, or allowing you to see yourself through the story of someone else, the ratings and reviews allow the work to be made more readily available for those who are searching for a solution. Love to you all for the incredible support of this work and the meaning and hope that it provides. The next lesson is genuinely strive and be satisfied with progress, even if that progress is minimal. I've said it time and again, but 0.01% is my objective for each day. Doing that every single day, 0.01% improvement turns into massive change over a long period of time if you do it consistently. Should you make a mistake or a misstep, stop. Stop what you're doing immediately. Acknowledge the mistake that you made, and then do the next best thing. What you want to avoid in the early stages of recovery is taking multiple steps back. And once again, you are on absolute high guard about avoiding the spiral down into the thought pattern of the fuck it's. The final lesson, and possibly the most surprising for me, because I did not know what to expect when I entered into recovery, and especially when I entered into long-term recovery, where a lot of the practices and the routines became more ingrained in my life and did form into stronger, I guess you could call them like habit loops. I didn't know what to expect once I hit that stage. And what I will say is that you will gain more time and more energy back than you likely even know what to do with. Take time and think about how you want to expend that time as well as that newfound energy. The way that I have structured my thinking around this lesson is thinking about things in terms of two buckets: a bucket of consumption and a bucket of creation. And with everything that I engage with in life, in every single day, I'm asking myself, am I a consumer in this situation, or am I a creator in this situation? And with the newfound time and energy that I have gotten back in my own life, my goal for myself is to find myself in the creator bucket as much as I possibly can. And now this doesn't mean I'm just like running around making doodles and drawing stuff on a piece of paper, or like singing random made up songs at the top of my lungs. But I'm really trying to challenge myself and be deliberate about moments where it's like, okay, I'm tired right now, but I've had a good day and I just want to sit down and I just want to have time with my wife and be a consumer, and we'll sit down and just watch something in that moment. I am almost agreeing and making an agreement with myself that I want to spend the time and energy that I've been gifted as a consumer in this situation. The beautiful part about entering into recovery is when you get to hit on that creative side. And the great part is it can be creative in aspects of your life that already existed before you entered into active recovery. And so what I mean by that, like, I came back to a job that was the exact same. It was the exact same people in the exact same roles, going after the exact same problems and opportunities day in and day out. And I found myself being able to be much more free-thinking, creative, energetic as I engaged in that area of my professional work life versus before I had entered into recovery and entered into rehab. So think about the time and energy that you're going to be getting back and where you want to inject creativity and where you want to be a consumer in your life. So that's all I've got for this week. Again, these moments where I get to go back and, sort of give to people in situations that I myself have been an incredibly meaningful part of being in active recovery. And as we talked about in the 12th step, you really find yourself, once you have hit a stage of long-term recovery where a lot of these things become habit, become ingrained, where the work becomes the most meaningful aspect of your life, where you do recognize and realize that you want to give and you want to put energy and creativity behind things that will help others that are coming after you. And so these moments that I do get to go back and engage with individuals at North Point have been some of the most meaningful conversations that I've ever had. And, it's like you walk into that room a stranger and you share and you connect and you engage with people, and not an hour later, you're hugging and embracing individuals. And it's really, again, just an incredible aspect of finding yourself in a community, in a world of active recovery, where you're surrounded by people who are striving for their best version of life, knowing that things can get better, desperately desiring to have things get better, and more often than not, willing to do the work that is required to go from early stages of recovery to having those habits ingrain and form, and to find yourself in long-term recovery where you are wanting and willing to give back to the next person in line. So with that, all the best. Love to you all. If you enjoyed this podcast, share it with others who might find it impactful, and give us a rating through your streaming platform of choice. Ratings and comments help spread the work to others who are desperately searching for a solution. This simple action could have profound impacts on the lives of others. My hope is that my story can help those who feel alone in their struggles with addiction or any other aspects of life. You can follow us on social media at Chapter 3 Stigma on Instagram and YouTube. If you want to reach out with a message through one of those channels, I will respond and let you know that you are not alone. All the best. You are loved, and know that this life is full of abundant joy and wonder, and is worth every struggle and bit of suffering you must endure. Until next time.